Hi there, my name is Nicole Young. In this video, I'll be showing you a start-to-finish food photography edit in Lightroom Classic. I'll share the behind-the-scenes setup, how I import, organize, and edit the photos. Let's get started. Let's begin by importing the photos into the Lightroom catalog. I have my SD card plugged into my computer, and I'm going to click the Import button on the bottom left. Now what you see here is kind of the compact import pop-up window. If this is all you're seeing, you'll probably want to expand this to see the entire view. To get to that, click that little arrow on the very bottom left, and it will open up and you can see everything now. This is my preferred way of viewing my photos when I import them, and I recommend that you do the same. Let's start on the left side of the window. It's already selected the import location, but I typically like to actually click on the devices at the top when I'm importing from an SD card. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that. And now I know that I'm definitely importing from the correct location. Another thing that you'll notice up here is there's an eject after import box. When this is checked, your card that you have plugged in to your computer will eject, so you can safely pull it out of your computer as soon as you're finished with the import process. Now let's look at the options up at the top. By default, the copy option has been selected. This means it's going to just copy everything on my card over to whatever folder that I specify. You can also select copy as DNG if you want to import your photos as DNG or digital negative files. I prefer to use the copy option because I use Fujifilm and there are certain profiles that I really like to use when I have that Fujifilm RAF file extension on my photos. So I prefer to keep them kind of in their native state, but it's totally up to you if you want to either copy or copy as DNG. Both the move and the add options are not clickable because when you are importing from a card, they're just not going to be available. If you were importing from a second hard drive or maybe another location on your computer, then you'll see those options as well. Just below that, we have a few other options down here. You'll likely want to use either the All Photos option or the New Photos option. I tend to keep this set on New Photos. Sometimes when I create photos from my camera, I don't always clear the card ahead of time, so I might have some older images still on my SD card. And by selecting New Photos, when I plug the SD card into my computer, Lightroom will scan all of the photos that I've already imported and compare them to whatever I'm trying to import from this card, and it'll look for duplicates. If it finds duplicate files, then they'll just kind of disappear from view, so you will not even import those. It won't even be an option to import those with that New Photos option selected. If you selected all photos, it wouldn't matter. It would just import all of them anyways. Let's go to the bottom. There's a little toolbar here where you can kind of preview and look at your photos a little bit differently. By default, you'll see everything in the grid view, but if you want to see a photo up a little bit closer, just click that loop view, and then you can kind of use the arrow keys to scroll through your photos. I prefer to look at my photos using that grid view. I just kind of like to see all the photos and just to kind of get a good feel for what is being imported. You can also use these check all or uncheck all boxes. You may want to do this if you are just hoping to import one or two photos quickly to get a couple off of the card so you can preview them on your computer. So you'd uncheck all and then you'd click on whichever ones that you chose to import. And whichever images you have checked, just like you see here, those are going to be the only photos that will actually import to the destination folder. I'm going to import all of these, so I'm going to go back to the bottom there and click Check All. Over on the right, there's a Sort option. I like to have this set to capture time. It's just kind of nice to see all of my photos in order. That way I can easily scroll through to make sure that all of the photos that I took are there, or maybe I'm just making sure that I have the right card that I'm actually importing to, because I usually have several of them lying around in my office. And then, of course, there's a thumbnail view here, so you can kind of increase or decrease the size of those thumbnails to see more or less at any given time. Down at the very bottom is an import preset option. I have no import presets saved here, so I don't have anything to show you. But these are not stylistic presets. Instead, what these are, they are basically just saved settings for whatever you decide to do over here on the right side of this window. So once I make a whole bunch of changes here on the right, then I can actually go in and save an import preset if I wanted to, and it would just make it a lot easier and faster for me to do kind of a similar import. So for example, on my main computer, I have several different folders where I kind of organize things differently, maybe my food photos, my travel photos, my stock photos. I can create an import preset that will automatically direct my photos over to those folders and also apply a bunch of different settings and keywords and things like that. So it just makes it a little bit easier to go through this process without having to remember to add all of those things every single time. Okay, so now let's go all the way over to the top right, and we'll go through each of these options, and you can kind of see how I actually work through Lightroom when I'm importing my files. So at the very top right, we have the file handling section. For the preview section, the default is usually going to be the embedded and sidecar files, but you can choose a different option. Because I don't have a whole lot of photos in this import, I'm actually going to choose the one-to-one option. And what that's going to do is it's going to build the largest previews that it can, and it's going to make it faster for me to scroll through them, to load them, and to zoom into them. But of course, there's always a trade-off. So one-to-one previews are going to be much larger in size, they're going to take up more space on your computer, and this whole import process is going to take longer. So once I actually click that import button, I'll probably just walk away from my computer and come back to it, let it do its thing, and build all those previews. That way, when I finally can sit down and cull my photos and sort them and eventually edit some of them, it's going to take a lot less time. Now, because those previews tend to take up more space on your computer, Lightroom has a pretty cool feature where it will discard those previews after a certain amount of time. Now, it doesn't matter if those previews are discarded, all of your data, all of your edits are still there. It's just the preview that it's showing you is what goes away. Now, if you'd like to see or change what you have the preview set to, go up to the Lightroom Classic option at the top, go down to your catalog settings. In the file handling section, you'll see an option here that says automatically discard one-to-one previews, and usually the default is after 30 days, but you could easily set it to 1 week, which I'll go ahead and do here. You can also say never if you have a ton of space on your computer and you don't have to worry about things slowing down. But for this example, I'm going to set this to after 1 week, which means in a week from now, after these are imported, all of those one-to-one previews that I've added are just going to kind of disappear. So it will no longer be taking up space on my computer. There are a few other options here. I'm actually not going to change anything else here. I'm just going to set that previews. I don't really need this box checked because I don't have any of these photos on my computer, but that's a good option to check if you really want to make sure you don't have duplicates imported. If you have a place that you like to back up to at the time of import, you can go ahead and click on this. This is an option I tend to use when I'm traveling because usually I will import the photos to my computer, but I also make a second backup of them to a hard drive at the exact same time. That way I have some redundancy with my files and they're in separate locations. So if something were to happen, if a bag were to get lost or stolen, then I'd always have my photos. You can also add your photos to a collection on import. So that's a nice option. If you were to check that, then you'd actually get to choose the collection or even create one. But I'm not going to use that. I just wanted to show that it's there. All right, let's go down to the file renaming. I always rename my files when I import them. I don't like the default settings that they are. So I'm going to check that rename files box. And I'm going to use this template dropdown just to take a look. One of my kind of go-to renaming options is the custom name original file number. So I tend to just almost always use this, and I usually just type my name there. If I were to click this little drop-down here, though, it actually shows you some of the previous things that you've added. So you can see that I've already added Nicole's there, and so I didn't have to retype it. You also have the option to use a shoot name, which is kind of similar to the custom name, but you can use that as well. I don't have a start number because I like to keep the original file number. It makes it a little bit more unique. Of course, I could also give this a much more custom name. such as whatever food item I was photographing. And normally I would do that, but if I scroll down here, you'll see that I actually have 2 different food shoots. So if I did that, then I would have to rename half of those photos, which really isn't a big deal. But for this example, I'm just going to go ahead and keep them all with the same, just Nicole Z with the actual original file number there, and that should be good to go. The next section here is where I can apply settings such as develop settings and metadata, and also add some keywords. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go into the develop settings, and this is something you can skip if you want to, but if you have a preset that you've already saved, or if you wanted to use one of the default presets that Lightroom has, then you can go right to it and it will auto-apply all of that on import. Like I said previously, I like to use the Fujifilm profiles when I import my Fujifilm photographs. So I'll go to the bottom here, and I've created a preset that all it has on it is the ASCII Soft profile. So it's just going to apply that profile. That's all it's going to do. But that just saves me a step. So now I don't have to do that afterwards. And it's possible I might change it to something else, but that's a really typical one that I use. So I like to see what the native Fuji profile does instead of relying on one of the Adobe generated profiles for my images. I do like to add metadata to my photos on import. That way when I post them online or share them anywhere, that metadata is embedded into the file. So I don't have a preset created, so I will go down and select new, and I'll just go ahead and type some things in here and create a preset so I can use it on future photos. So if you want to kind of like drop everything down here so you can get a good feel for what all of the options are, most of the stuff that I do is going to be with the copyright and the creator. So I'm just going to kind of go through again and just kind of collapse some of these sections because I don't want to, make global changes to everything with things like basic info, camera info, title, things like that. So I'm going to get down to copyright and I'll just start typing. So I'll type my name. I'm going to change this to copyrighted, and my images, I give them the all rights reserved. And I'll also type my copyright info. So I have a URL that I use on my website. That way, if anyone goes to it, then they'll see that it's a copyrighted photo and how to get in touch with me if they wanted to license it. I'm going to copy this because there's another spot I'm going to use it on this form, and that's down here in the creator website. Basically goes to the same place, so I'll go ahead and add that. And I'll keep going. I can type my name here as well. And, you can fill in as much or as little information as you want here. So I'm just going to kind of leave some of this here empty for now. But, you can always go through and add all of your information. Maybe you have a business address that you want to make sure goes there. But you can see that there's a little check mark next to each section that I'm typing, and that means that it's going to save to my preset. So I'm just going to scroll down to see if there's anything else that I wanted to add kind of globally across all of these photos. And it looks like that's pretty much it. There is a section here for keywords, but I'm going to keep that blank because I don't want to create a metadata preset that can apply to other photos unless they were all going to be the exact same type of photo. So I'll just go ahead and leave that blank. So now I'll go ahead and just save this as a new preset. So I'll go up to this preset dropdown and select Save Current Settings as a new preset. And I'll just call this one Nicole Z and click Create. Now, because I've created that, I can go ahead and cancel this and go over to that metadata section and select Nicole Z, and it should apply all of those settings to my photos. Now, in this keyword section, I can add some relevant keywords that are in my photo. I'm going to keep this pretty generic because I have a few different shoots here, but I can always add more keywords if I'd like once I get into the library. So I'll go ahead and just say food. I usually say Nicole Z. Maybe lunch. There's some cheese in both of these, and that's probably going to be good. Now it's time to choose where I want these photos to be imported into. So I'll click that destination dropdown, and I'd like to add them into my external hard drive. So I'll click on that hard drive there. As soon as I do that, it starts to show me what it's going to look like once these files are imported. By default, it's going to organize them by date, and it's going to show that date format. I personally do not like to import them specifically by date. I tend to like to create one date folder, and then I just kind of subcategorize it with each shoot name after that. So I'm going to change the organize dropdown into one folder. And if you look down at the bottom, I do not yet have a Food 2021 folder, so I'll go ahead and just create that here, and then I can just further organize my photos afterwards. I have 2 different shoots here, so I need to separate them out anyway, so this will work out really well. So I'm going to go ahead and just create that folder called Food 2021, and now I'm ready to import my files. I'll simply click the Import button at the bottom right, and I'm just going to step away from my computer and let Lightroom import all of these files and create those previews, and then we'll get back to culling and organizing and then editing the photos when it's finished. Before I get back to Lightroom, I wanted to show you my actual behind-the-scenes setup of both of these food shoots that I did. I like to use natural diffused sunlight with my food photos. It's a beautiful quality of light, and it's just easy to work with. You can mimic a lot of this effect with lights and strobes, just kind of positioning them in the same location, making sure you diffuse them really well. But I work in kind of a small space. I don't have an established photo studio. This is actually just inside of my office. I have a table set up against a north-facing window because I'm in the northern hemisphere. North-facing light is going to be nice and diffused on a sunny day. I believe it was a cloudy day outside when I photographed this, but there's still enough light for me to get some really good quality of light on my food images. That translucent white kind of triangle-shaped thing in the back is a Lastolite Tri-Grip diffuser. I love these things for food photography because they're really easy to just prop up against a window or to hold up with a light stand. I tend to work very simply with my food shoots, and just propping it against a window like that works really well. I also have a really large diffuser. You're not seeing it here, but sometimes I'll stick that behind my table setup, and it just kind of diffuses the entire window. But the Lastolite Tri-Grips are great, and they work really well when you're just kind of doing a quick setup. Now, what they do is when the light is kind of harsh coming through the window, or if it's just too bright, it helps to soften and spread the light out, and it just helps to make it less contrasty. I have a couple of them, and sometimes I'll even stack them on top of each other, in front of each other, to really amplify that diffused effect. On the left side is a piece of white foam board. It's just a 2-foot by 3-foot piece of foam board. What I do is I cut it down the middle, and then I tape it up again with some gaffer tape, or you could use duct tape. That allows it to kind of bookend and fold so it kind of stands on its own, and that helps to add some fill light to the front of the food in case it's a little too dark. Now, what I have going on here in this setup is those pieces of bread are just some of the toasted bread that I actually used for the food shoot, but they're going to last a little bit longer, so I use them as my stand-in. And I was able to then kind of position my entire setup, with the plates and the tabletop settings and all of the accessories that I want to use, and just kind of move everything around until I get everything into a place where I feel like it looks good. I also get the exposure set up and test the lighting. That way, when I'm ready to actually plate or cook my food, I'm able to work with it really quickly. And that's a very important thing with food photography. Even with food that doesn't need to be cooked, you still don't want it to sit out for too long. Otherwise, it does kind of dies on the set, and it starts to look kind of like it's a little bit old. The fresher the food is, the better it's going to look in your photograph. I also did some kind of top-down photos with this setup. The lighting is basically the same. I have it set to kind of an angled light coming from the left side of the frame there for this setup. I also use a tripod for my food photography. Oftentimes when I'm using this type of lighting setup, while there is a good amount of diffused light coming in, sometimes it's a little too dark for handheld if I want to keep my ISO really low, which I tend to keep at the native setting of ISO 200. I also use a cable release. That's what that little cord sticking into my camera is. That way I don't have to touch the camera when I'm actually exposing my shots. That helps to reduce any type of camera shake that I might add to the photo. To get my camera into this position, I'm using a camera stand. It's a little bit overkill for just photographing inside of my office, but I've had one for a while and it's what I use, so I kind of just tuck it out of the way. And let me go to the next photo here. So this kind of just shows that boom arm from my camera stand there. It just allows me to kind of move that camera over the table and get those top-down shots a lot easier. This is the second shoot that I did, so I kind of kept everything in that top-down setup when I started out with my food here. And here's kind of a pulled back view of what that looks like. You can see I added a second diffuser for this shot. The light was just a little too intense, so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too bright and too contrasty. Now, another thing that I did for this setup was I added a small piece of black foam board to the very back. The white that you see on top of this salad is burrata, and it's a very, it's a white cheese, and you cut into it and it kind of gets kind of shiny. It's very creamy on the inside. It's really delicious. But I was getting a little bit too much glare and reflection on the top of the cheese, so I added that piece of black board back there until it kind of like cut that light coming through and just helped to balance it out so I didn't have this really bright white hot spot on the top of my photograph. When I imported my files, I added them all into one Food 2021 folder. But I have two photo shoots here, and I'd really like to kind of separate them out to make it easier to organize. I'm also going to go ahead and rename the files to make the file name a little bit more appropriate for the photo that it represents. So I'm inside of the Food 2021 folder, and if I scroll all the way down, you can see I have two different food photo shoots here. So I'm going to click on the first image, and then I'm just going to scroll down until I can find the end of the first food photo shoot. And there it is. I'm going to hold that shift key and click, and it will select all of those images. Next, I'm going to go over to the folder panel. I'm going to right click and select Create Folder inside of Food 2021. I'll give this a name. And I'm going to make sure that I have the Include Selected Photos checked. And then I'll click Create. Now over in that Folders panel, if I drop down that folder, I have a folder that only includes those bruschetta images. Now let's do that for the second group of images. I'll go back up to the Food 2021 folder. I'll scroll down until I find the first image, and there it is. I'll click on it once, and then go to the very end of the images, hold the Shift key, and click again. Now I'll right-click over that Food 2021 folder. I'll select Create Folder inside. Give this a name. Make sure Include Selected Photos is checked, and click Create. Now I have each of them separated out, so it's a lot easier for me to actually access them when I need to. Now let's go ahead and rename these files. I'll start out with the bruschetta images. I want to rename all of these photos, so I'm inside of this folder, and I'll use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control A. Next, I'll go up to my menu at the top, go to Library, and rename photos. This is really similar to when you import your photos. So I'll use that file naming dropdown and select Custom Name and Original File Number. I'll give this the same name as the folder name. And you can see in the example exactly what it's going to look like. And then I'll click OK. And now you can see in the file name there, all of those have now changed to be a little bit more appropriate for that image. Now let's go over to that other folder and rename those images as well. So I'll click on the other folder, use that keyboard shortcut Command or Control A, go up to Library, rename photos, and I'll just call this one Salad. I still have it set to the same file naming structure, so I don't need to change that, and then click OK. Now my photos are organized and renamed properly. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some keywords to these photos that are a little bit more specific to the photo shoot. So I have all of these files selected here in the burrata salad folder. I'm going to go over to the keywording option, And I'm just going to click inside of that box and start typing. I have a salad in here. I have arugula, burrata, and maybe appetizer. Now I'm going to go back over to the other folder. I'll select all of these photos and do the same thing. Bruschetta is one. I have tomatoes, arugula as well, bread, toasted, and appetizer as well. So now my photos are organized, I've added some keywords, and I've renamed the file. In the next step, I'm going to pick the photos that I like best so I can go ahead and start editing. Now I'm going to go through and pick my favorites from the bruschetta photo shoot. I like to start by looking at the photos in this grid or thumbnail view. And oftentimes, the photos that are kind of later in the photo shoot or later in the setup are usually going to be the ones that I like better. So for example, this photo right here versus this photo. I'll press the space bar so I can see it a little bit larger. If I scroll back and forth between these two photos, you can see that the item in the background is kind of shifting around. I originally was photographing it like this, but I noticed that right here, there's some merging happening. The parchment paper from that piece of food in the back is kind of being overlapped by the food in the foreground. So I rotated that food just slightly, and now I have kind of a clear outline around my image. It makes it a little bit more pleasing. I usually like to pay close attention to the backgrounds of my photos, and that's one of the things I'm always looking for. I also like to zoom in on my photo to make sure it's in focus, and I have that nice little time leaf right there, nice and in focus. So I like this image. I'm going to press P to flag it as a pick. I'll go back to grid view by pressing G, and I noticed that after I kind of did that photo, actually let me go back into it. If I go to the next image, it looks like I removed some of my fill light. Now, when I was photographing it, that probably looked like a good idea, but now that I can see it a little bit larger on my computer, I actually really liked that fill light. But I will be able to balance this out using Lightroom here to kind of fill in some of that light. So for now, I'll go ahead and keep this photo as is. I do like how that looks, but I'm going to go back to grid view and kind of preview some of my other images. So it looks like I have quite a few photos that are kind of similar. So I'm going to just kind of make one of these bigger and then just kind of go back and forth and just kind of see what I changed. I'm just kind of scrolling left and right. Looks like they're just kind of positioned a little bit differently. Another thing I'd like to do here while I'm in loop view is I'd really like to see what my exposure is so I can see what my aperture is set to. If I look in the very top right, I am able to see that information, but sometimes it's nice to have it kind of as an overlay. So I'm going to make a few changes to my setup here so it's a little bit easier for me to see that. I'm going to go up to View, View Options, and then in that loop view, I'm going to click to Show an Info Overlay. Now here you can actually set what you want to actually look at. So right now, my exposure is going to be important. And in particular, I want to choose the f-stop. I'll just go ahead and keep the other information as is, and I'll exit out of this. I'm also going to hide the left panel, just to give me a little bit more room. And I'll hide that right panel as well, because right now, I really don't need to see all of that information on the left and the right. I really just want to see my photos. So I'm going to press G. And now that I have a little bit more real estate, I can increase my thumbnail size. So I'm going to press the plus icon on my keyboard until my thumbnails get a little bit larger. And I think this is going to be a good size for me to look at. I really like looking at the thumbnail view when I'm choosing my photos. It's usually the first thing that's going to catch my eye. I mean, if you think about it, whenever you share a photo online or on social media or maybe on a stock portfolio, the first thing people are going to see is that thumbnail. So the thumbnail has to stand out. So I have made one selection here. I picked this photo, and now I'm just going to kind of go down and look at some of the other angles of images. I like this photo right here. The photo next to it is similar, but the reason I like this photo is because the entire food in the foreground is in the shot. In this one, I cropped it off on the right a little bit. It doesn't look bad, but this one, in my opinion, is better. And I probably have other photos that are similar. So I'm going to click on this photo here, and then I'm going to press that space bar, and I'm just going to kind of scroll through to see what's different. And right away, I could see one of the changes I made right in the center there. I added a piece of cheese to kind of block that piece of green arugula, the stem, from showing. So I added that piece of cheese, and then I also made some adjustments to the background. And then I adjusted some of the light, or the light changed a little bit. And I think in going back and forth that this photo right here is my favorite. I'm going to press P to pick it. Now keep in mind when you're doing this process, it's not going to hurt to pick more photos than you think you need. And I'll show you an easy way to sort through those images when you have several pics of photos that look really similar. So I'm just going to keep scrolling through. And now it looks like I started adding some balsamic vinegar to the top. And I did it really slowly, it looks like. I'm just kind of watching it drip down. And I think I like this photo right here, so I'm going to press P to pick this one. The reason I like this one is because as the balsamic vinegar kind of drips down, it just kind of looks kind of funny. And I'm not sure if I really like the vinegar on that front tomato as much as the other photo. It doesn't look bad. It's part of the food. So I'm just going to kind of keep going and see what these look like. And now, what I like to do when I do my food photo shoots is I like to kind of get all of the setup shots, as many good photos as I can. And then if I wanted to do something like in this case, I'm kind of pouring some balsamic vinegar on top of it. Or maybe it's a pancake setup or waffles and I want to pour syrup on it. Or anything where I'm going to pour something on top of the food and potentially make it like not able to be photographed afterwards. I like to get as many kind of establishment shots as I can, so I have some really good photos to work with. And then while I'm pouring it, as you can see, there's a streak of kind of that dark vinegar pouring down. I wanted to try and get some photos of me pouring it on there. And this one's okay. I'm going to press P. I'm not sure if I like it as much as the other photos, but it's not bad, and it does show some movement. But I do that because I want to get the pouring shots. And, just in case if I pour everything on there and it looks awful, I still have some other good photos to work with. So I'm just going to keep scrolling through, and you can tell my shutter speed is pretty slow. I was 1/7 of a second, and pouring it on here, some of that got a little too blurry. So here now it looks like I made a few more adjustments to the food to kind of, just kind of reposition things on the plate there. So I do like this photo. I'm going to press P to pick it. And now I did a few close-ups. So this one's nice. Let me zoom in. I just want to make sure everything's in focus. And I was using a f4 on a macro 80mm lens, so it's got a pretty narrow depth of field, but it is in focus. I do like that. This one's okay. I'm not sure if I like the angle that I shot it at. I think I like this one a little bit better here, so I'll go ahead and pick that. And now I'm moving into kind of my top-down photos. So these are a little bit different. I'm actually going to go to grid view and scroll down to the bottom because I'm going to guess that the ones at the bottom are probably going to be the ones that I like the best. So I really like this one here, and there's not a lot of difference between this one and this other one. And if I wanted to get my hand into the shot, maybe I'll pick that one as well. So I'm going to pick this photo. I like how this one, I like the angle of this one. So I'm going to pick this one up here. And let's see. I'm going to pick this one because I really don't know what the difference between this one and this one is. So I'm just going to pick it. And now I have a really good selection of images. So now what I'd like to do is filter these photos so I'm only seeing those images that I picked. The easiest way to do that is to go down to the film strip view, go over to where it says filter, and just click on that filter name. When you do that, you'll see several options for filtering your photos. I want to filter by pic status, so I'm going to click that little pic icon until it turns pure white. I'm going to reduce the thumbnail size so I can see my photos, and these are all of the images that I have picked. Now, like I said before, if you have a couple of photos that are really identical and you would like to kind of decide between those two photos, you'll want to use survey mode for that. So I have this first photo here selected. I'm going to hold my Command or Control key and then click the other photo that's kind of similar to it. There may be nothing different between these two photos, but it's really difficult to tell. So there's a few different ways you could do this. You could press your space bar, which is going to kind of bring it into that loop view. And then if you use your right or left arrow key, it's just going to kind of go back and forth between those two images. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is with those photos selected, press the N key. That's going to take you into survey mode. You can have several photos in survey mode. So if I were to hold my Command or Control key and select a few more images down here in the film strip, you can see how those are being added to that view. So I'm going to remove those from my view. And I only wanted these two images to appear. So the obvious difference between these two images is the placement of that bowl on the bottom right. In looking at these two photos, I feel like the photo on the right looks a little too cluttered with that bowl kind of squished up against that white fabric there. So what I'm going to do here is just go to that flag and click that flag to remove it. And so now I've removed that image from my pick view, so now it's kind of out of sight. And to get out of survey view, the easiest way is just to click the escape key. So now I have a good selection of images from that bruschetta shoot. Next, I'm going to go through the same steps with the burrata salad. Now I'm going to pick the photos that I want to edit in the burrata salad photo shoot. So one thing you'll notice with my photos is I kind of like to show the process of kind of plating when I have setups like this where I actually plate the food on the set. So if I go to full screen, you'll see I add, the arugula, and then I add the burrata, and then I sprinkle some salt and pepper onto it, and then I just kind of keep adding things to the dish and kind of playing with lighting as I do that. Now, the reason I like to do this is because I am adding a lot of elements and it's kind of an organic thing. So I want to make sure that not only do I have photos that kind of show this process, because sometimes there's a good photo in there when it's just a really simple salad, but I also kind of have some safety shots in case something happens to the food while I'm plating it. So I really like this is kind of my final edition, almost my final edition. I'll show you some stuff when I get to the end of the shoot here. And I'm going to go ahead and pick this photo because it's pretty much mostly set for this style. I do eventually kind of cut into the burrata, but I wanted to make sure that I got some good photos of it before I did that. So I'm going to press that P key to pick this photo. I'm going to go back to my grid view, and then we can kind of scroll through and see what some of these look like from kind of a further away view. So I have some images here. I'm not really sure if I'm fond of this setup. It's a little dark. That glass in the background is a little intense. So I'm not going to pick any of these images, but I do like what's going on with these photos. So I'm actually going to click on one and then go into that kind of loop view and then scroll through each of them just to see what is different about them. And typically, as I'm going through, I'm making changes because I'm looking at my photo in the background and I'm in the foreground and I'm looking at all these little elements. And I think I like this one here before I started adding the balsamic to it. So I'm going to press P to pick this photo. And then, I'd started adding some other elements too. So I added some balsamic, I added some thyme. And you can see I kind of reused some of the same elements from the other photo shoot. I was trying to just kind of be a little bit more efficient with my food. So I had multiple photos I could shoot with some of the same ingredients. Now that right here is kind of the last photo before I cut into it. And it looks like these two images have slightly different focal points as I kind of go back and forth to them. So I'm going to zoom in and just take a look at this top part here. And now I'm going to go back and forth. And what probably happened here was I just focused on a different part of the scene. It's a very subtle change as I kind of jump back and forth. But I do like this second one a little bit better, so I'm going to press P to pick that. And now I start to kind of cut into things. And you can see I even added a little bit more pepper and some thyme to it, and I added another glass back there to the background. I do like this shot here, so I'll go ahead and pick this. And then I did some top-down setups. I'm not really sure which of these I like better. I think I'm probably going to go with this one. The other one, I feel like there's a little too much tension, so I'll go ahead and pick this one here. And now, if you recall, at the beginning of the video when I showed those behind-the-scenes photos, I showed where that little black card was in the background, and this is actually where I added it. So I was looking at this photo, and after I cut into the burrata, it got really shiny and really white, and just there was too much reflection going on. So I put that black card back there, and it really did a good job of kind of removing that contrast. Let me go ahead and select both of these. I'll go into survey view so you can really see them side by side. The left image, there's a lot of glare. Even the background is a little too bright. And by adding that black card, I was still able to let a lot of light through to the scene, but it blocked it in a really good spot. There's still some definite shine on the burrata, which is what I want because I want these elements and these kind of textures and things to show in the food photo. But adding that black card did a great job of helping balance it out and just makes it look a little bit more refined. So I am going to click back on that photo there and go back to that kind of loop view and just kind of go back and forth here and see which of these I like better. And it looks like I started to add some other ingredients. I added some more almonds to the back there. But I do actually like this photo better. Even though I added almonds to these other images, the focus seems a little bit better in this photo. So I'm going to zoom in here. And it looks like I have more depth of field here on the top of it. I probably shifted my focus point, which kind of shifted everything that's in focus there. So I'm going to pick this one because I do like where the focus is happening on the top of that. I'm just going to kind of skip over here now to these vertical shots, and let's go through each of these. So I'm just going to scroll through them. And one thing here you can see I made was a change to the background. That glass that I added back there, it didn't have any water in it, but oftentimes when I have glasses in the background, I don't usually add anything to them, depending on the texture of the glass. Sometimes I'll add some fake ice just to kind of give it like a sparkly effect, but it's really distracting having that really bright light kind of shining there on that glass. So I had some olive oil in a little container, and I wasn't really planning on adding it to the photo shoot, but I put it back there and it just seemed to work really well. So it adds a different kind of color, and I just really liked it. So I positioned that back there and just kind of moved it around a little bit until I got things kind of set where I like them. So I think I'm going to pick this one here. I like what's going on. And then I kind of moved the plate around a little bit. And then here is where I remembered that I was going to add blueberries to this salad. I had completely forgot about it. And then I walked into my kitchen and I noticed that I had the blueberries sitting out. So I was like, oh goodness, I need to do this before I finish with my photos. So I added the blueberries and I thought it looked really good. And it just added a nice kind of different color. So I'm going to pick this one because I really like this setup. And then I went back and I did kind of redid some more of those horizontal shots because I did have those new blueberries added to it. So I'll go ahead and pick one of these horizontal images and just kind of keep going through. And it looks like I was making some utensil changes. If I kind of scroll back and forth between them, you can see how things kind of shifted around. So I do, let's see, I'm trying to decide between these two images. I think I like this one better. There's a little bit more going on there with the balsamic kind of smudging on the right. So I'll pick that photo. And then I decided to add an element of movement. So I brought my hand into the shot and I got the balsamic vinegar and I started to pour it. And I tried to do it really slowly. And, I don't really like the ones here where it's too blurred. So I'm going to see if I can find one. I think this is looking a little bit better here. So I've got a few different options. This one looks like it's in focus. It looks like focus lost, or maybe it was just motion blur there. So I'm just going to go through all of these. I'm going backwards now because I like those initial ones. I'm going to go with this first one. I like that one a lot. And I'm just kind of going through and getting past the motion blur ones. And then I have some final shots here. It looks like I had some more glare happening there, so I probably added another black card back there to kind of cut through that glare. And I think that's a good shot right there. Actually, I'm not sure if I like this one or the one that was kind of too down from it. So I'm going to just go back and forth between these two photos. And this is another one of those issues where the focus point is going to change how much of the image is in focus. So I'm going to zoom in to the photo and take a closer look and see what's in focus here and which one I like better. So really the battle that I'm playing here is, do I want this part to be in focus or do I want the center to be in focus? And I'm just kind of trying to decide where my eye is being drawn to, and I think that this is going to be the winner just because it's kind of more central in the image. So I'm going to go to that one and press P to pick that photo. And now I just have a handful of photos here that I did from kind of above, a top-down shoot. Oftentimes the last photo that I shoot is probably the one I like best, and that definitely is the case here because I added a little bit of olive oil as a finishing touch. So I'll go ahead and press P, and let's go ahead and see all of those photos that I picked. I'll activate that filter. I'll press G, and I'll reduce the size. So these are all of my winning shots from my burrata salad photo shoot. These are the photos I'm going to edit, but I'm going to start with only editing one of the images, and then when I'm finished, I'll sync all of them so they look very similar and they have kind of the same colors and tones. So what I like to do is I like to pick one photo that I kind of think best represents everything and maybe could be a good candidate for doing all of the things I need to it, and then I can sync the other images, and oftentimes I still will have to go in and make a few adjustments after syncing to some of the other photos, but I'll go ahead and pick one of these photos. I'm going to start out with this image here, and I'll press D to go to the Develop module. I'm going to go ahead and hide my left sidebar just by clicking that arrow on the far left, and also the film strip at the bottom. This just gives me a little bit more real estate to kind of see everything on the screen a little bit better. I'm going to begin by going over to the basic panel. I'll drop it down. And by the way, I have my panels set to what's called solo mode. So if you press and hold your Option or Alt key and click on those arrow drop downs, it will either toggle between being able to open all of them or only being able to open one at a time. So I'm going to press and hold that Option or Alt key once again and then click that basic panel. And when those arrows kind of have that little dot pattern to them, that means that anytime you open up another panel, it's going to collapse the one that you had open before. It's just a really clean and kind of minimalistic way of working inside of Lightroom. Let's go ahead and jump into the edits here. I usually start at the top with that profile. If you remember, I used the camera Astia Soft preset that I had created, so it applied that when I imported it, but I still usually go in and look at what some of the other profiles do to my photos before committing to one. So I'm going to click on this little grid icon on the right, and that opens up the profile browser. Now, camera matching is what's going to actually house anything that will match specifically to your camera model. If you use Sony or Canon or Nikon, you'll see different things here than what you see with what I have. I use Fujifilm, so mine are going to match with the Fujifilm. You can also play around with some of the artistic styles. And a little fun trivia fact here, I actually created the profiles that go in that modern pack there. So if you ever use any of those, that's where they came from. And by the way, if you purchase or download any other profiles, they'll also show up here as well. But I'm going to go ahead and stick with that camera matching section to browse the other Fujifilm profiles. So this first one here is the one that I already have applied. And it's nice because you can see a thumbnail preview of what they look like. If you don't see this thumbnail kind of grid, there's a drop down here on the top right that lets you actually kind of preview them a little bit differently. So you can just do a straight up list. There is that large view that shows them a little bit bigger. I usually like using that grid view. It's just my own personal preference. Velvia is another profile that I tend to use a lot for food photography. Sometimes it can be overpowering and have a little too much saturation. I actually kind of like what it's doing here. And if I kind of hover off of it and then toggle, and I'm not clicking, I haven't clicked on it yet, but if I hover off of it and then hover over it and watch my photo while I'm doing that, I can see what it's doing to the image. And I actually do like what it's doing. I like this look. So I'm going to commit to this and click the Velvia profile to apply that to my photo. Next, I'm going to click Close at the top, and I'm going to kind of continue down into the other sections to make some more edits. In looking at this photo, one thing I notice is that it has a slight yellow or orangish color cast to it, and I should be able to correct this pretty simply with the white balance sliders. So I'm going to go over to that temperature slider. I'm just going to click and drag it very slightly to the left, and I'm just watching my photo when I do this. So sometimes I do go a little too far just to kind of see what it looks like if I go too far to that left, just because I want to find that tipping point and then backtrack, and I usually find a good balance after I do that. So I think I found a good spot for it. I'm just going to do a quick before and after toggle. I want to get a feel for what my photo looked like before I started editing and where I am right now. It looks like the bruschetta is a little bit dark in the front. I could have added more fill light to this, and I actually did add fill light to this one. It just looks a little dark now that I'm seeing it on my computer. So I'm going to drop down to the shadows section, and I'm going to move that to the right. I'm just watching my photo as I'm doing this. The numbers don't really matter. It's all about what it looks like here, and I think that did a good job. I'm also going to go up and play a little bit with the exposure and the contrast just to see if it maybe needs a little bit more light. I don't want to go too heavy with that brightness, so I'm just going to back it off just a touch there and maybe add a tiny bit of contrast. Another slider I like to use here with food is the texture slider. It does a really neat job of really bringing out the textures. And of course, if I slide it back and forth, you can really see how it can kind of go overboard if you push it too far. I'm going to keep it somewhere in the 30s there, and that seems to be a pretty good look. And if I zoom in and then do a toggle before and after, by the way, I'm just using that / key to see that preview of that before and after. And it does really seem like it's bringing out some of the details in that front piece of food. I would like to add a little bit more contrast to this photo, and I'm going to do that in the tone curve section. So I'll go over to tone curve, and I first want to make sure that I have the actual point curve available. You may see this option here with all of those sliders, the parametric curve, but in order to actually really manipulate the curve manually, you'll want to go over to the RGB curve. So I'll just go ahead and click that. And now I'm just going to add a really simple S-curve to my photo. So I'm going to click in the upper right quadrant and then drag up, just watching my photo while I'm doing this. And then I'll go and do the opposite with that lower left quadrant and then just kind of drag down. And I'm just kind of trying to find that original line. So you can see it's a really subtle S-curve. But if I toggle it off and on, it is adding a nice touch of contrast and even some brightness there to that background. Now I'm going to go down to HSL so I can kind of manipulate some of the colors independently of each other. Oftentimes when you go here right away, you're only going to see maybe the hue or the saturation section open. There's hue, saturation, and luminance, and you can go into them independently if you only want to really work on one thing at a time. I kind of prefer to see all of them at once. That way I can jump around and really make changes without having to click back and forth to each of those sections. So I'm looking at the colors in my image, and the first thing I'm going to do is go down to the saturation section and go into the greens, and I'm just going to increase the greens. I just like to watch it. It looks like I can push this one fairly far to the right and still get a good result. I also want to see what happens if I take that yellow. I'm just kind of moving it around. And maybe I'll increase the yellow just a touch. I don't want to overdo the yellow or even the orange saturation too much because there is a lot of that in my photo and I don't want it to be too overpowering. But I would like to play around with the brightness, and that would be in the luminance section. So now I can kind of target the luminosity of each individual color value. So for example, I'll go into green, and if I move that to the right, if you watch some of those greens, it's really making them a lot brighter. So then I'll do the same with the yellow. And I think that's a little too much. So I'm just going to reset that one by double-clicking that yellow slider. I'll see what happens if I move the orange to the right. And I think I'll just do that a touch. And then the same with red. So maybe I'll make that red just a tiny bit brighter. Now I'm just going to toggle this one panel off and on to see exactly what that's doing. And adding that touch of brightness and saturation to the greens really made a good effect, especially if you're looking off in the background. Just brightened the whole image up. Next, I'm going to jump all the way down to the transform panel and make a few adjustments here. The one thing I like to do inside of the transform panel with my food photography is I like to try to bring the front of the image a little bit closer to me. And the way I do that is I first increase the vertical slider just a touch, and then I go down to aspect and I decrease the aspect. I also want to make sure that I constrain the crop. There's a little bit of white that's appearing at the top after I made this adjustment. So it doesn't really look like much happened, but if I toggle this off and on, you can see it's almost kind of like shifting the photo towards the front of the frame. It's just a nice little trick that you can do with your food photos or any type of photo where you are kind of focusing on something in the foreground. Lastly, I'm going to jump into that effects section, and I'm going to add a nice dark soft vignette. So I'll take the amount and I'm going to reduce the amount. Sometimes I like to go a little extreme with this, and then I'll scale it back to a more appropriate setting after I've made other adjustments. But making the vignette really dark right off the bat is a good way to really see the results from the other things you're doing. Then I'll go down to feather. I always increase the feather. I'll take the midpoint, maybe bring it a little closer to the center. And now I can take that amount and bring it back to a little bit more of a normal setting there. Toggle that off and on. I might even make it a little bit brighter. And that's looking pretty good. So here's my before and my after. Now let's jump back over to the library and sync these images together so all of my photos have the same look. So I'll go ahead and press G. So I have that first image selected, and I kind of have two groupings of photos here. I have photos where I was shooting the image kind of from a sit-down view where I was kind of looking at it, from a normal perspective, and then the top-down view of those images below. So I'm going to do this kind of in two different batches. I have that photo selected. I'm going to hold my Shift key. I'm going to click all the way to the right to get this other image. I still have to pick up this photo over here, so I'm going to hold my Command or Control key and click that. I need to make sure I can see all of my other panels. They're all hidden right now. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and then click Tab, and I'm going to click it twice, and now I have all of my panels back into view. So now I have all of those images selected, making sure that I had my edited image as the first one that I selected. I'm going to go to the very bottom right and click Sync Settings. Once I do this, a Synchronize Settings window pops up, and it's asking me, what do I want to sync? For this image, I'm going to sync everything because I didn't do anything that was overly specific to any one photo, such as spot removal or cropping or any specific type of transformation. So I'm just going to go to the bottom left here and click Check All, and then click Synchronize. So all of those photos are synchronized. I have a few images that need a little bit more work to them because they're just a little too dark. But before I do that, I'm going to sync my last three photos here so they have the same color and tone adjustments. So I'm going to click off of the image, and then I'm just going to scroll down, and I'm going to click one of those photos that I've already synced, hold my Shift key, and select the remaining photos. Now I'm going to click Sync Settings again, but this time I'm going to deselect Transform. I don't really need to transform a photo when it's shot from a top-down setting. That kind of adjustment that I made might look kind of funny. So I have that set there. I'll go ahead and click Synchronize. And those photos are synced, but as you can see, they still need a little bit of adjustment. The color looks a little off, so let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to start out actually with these top photos. Now, when I have a group of photos that need almost the exact same type of adjustment, there's another way that you can sync your images, but you can do it easily and quickly while editing your photo. So I'm going to start out by clicking this first photo. I'm going to hold the Shift key and click this other photo here. All of these are a little too dark in the foreground, so I'm going to adjust these all at once. Now I'm going to press D to go to the Develop module. On the bottom right here, there are a few options. Most likely, you'll probably see it say Sync. There's also a Reset, and of course, Reset will reset your photos. I have the film strip view available, and I can see that I have 3 photos highlighted at the bottom. If I change this to Auto Sync, now any adjustment that I make to the photo I have in front of me will also sync and adjust the other images that are highlighted. So let's try this out. I'm going to go into the Basic panel, and I'm going to go down to Shadows, and I'll increase the shadows a little bit more. Now, if you look down at the bottom, it also adjusted those other photos. But this still looks a little too dark, so I'm going to add a gradient to this photo to only lighten the bottom part of the photo. So I'll click the graduated filter at the top. Then I'm going to click at the bottom of my photo, drag up, and I'm going to hold that Shift key to keep it nice and straight. And then I'll release it somewhere around the center of the photo. Next, I'll go over to the settings here. I'm going to start out by increasing the exposure, and that adds some nice brightness to that. And I'll also add a touch of contrast back just to balance it out. I'll collapse this, and I'll check out my before and my after, and that did a really good job of adding more brightness to that photo. Now I'm going to address the other 3 photos that look like they are a little too yellow. So I'm going to click on that first image. I'm going to hold my Shift key and select the last photo. Next, I'll go up to the temperature slider. I still have auto sync active, so any adjustments I make here are going to adjust every single photo that's selected at the bottom. So I'll start out by going up to the white balance, and I'm going to move that temperature slider to the left. And that did a good job of removing that kind of yellow color cast. It also looks like some of the cheese is a little too bright, so I'm going to take the highlight slider and reduce it just to kind of bring back some of that detail. And there's my before and after for my top-down photo. Now if I go back to grid view, all of my photos have been edited and they all have a very similar look and feel to them. Now I'm going to edit the photos from the burrata photo shoot. I have the photos open here in the grid view, and I have only the photos that I picked visible here. Just like with the previous edits for the bruschetta photos, I had some photos that were photographed from different angles. So I'm going to make some slight arrangements here with my photos to kind of group them together. So this first photo was a top-down image. I'm just going to click on it and drag it over so it's at the end of the grouping here. And I have 3 other ones here kind of in the middle. I'm just going to highlight each of those by clicking on them while holding that Command or Control key, and then just drag those so they're also at the end. So now I have all of my photos kind of grouped a little bit better. Now because I just made a whole bunch of edits in basically the same light, I'm going to go back over to the bruschetta photos and I'm going to copy over those settings. So I'm going to go over to the bruschetta photos, make sure I'm only viewing those picked photos. I'll click on one of the images, right-click, go down to Develop Settings, Copy Settings. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy everything here. So I'll just click Copy. Then I'll go back down to the burrata photos, make sure I'm viewing only those picked images. And I'll go ahead and copy these similarly to how I synced the images before. First, I'm going to highlight all of the photos at the top. These are all of the images that were just kind of photographed at like that normal angle. Oh, it looks like I organized some a little wrong here. So I'm actually going to make a really quick adjustment. I'm going to move these photos just to the front of this grouping here. Now I have everything where I need it. So let me start over. I'm going to go ahead and hold my Shift key, click on that first image, and then click on the last image there. I'm going to right-click, go down to Develop Settings, and Paste Settings. Now it looks like I have some editing that needs to be done to this group of photos. They look just a little too bright. So I'm going to click on one of the images. I'm going to press D to go to the Develop module. I'll hide this left pane over here. I'm going to make sure I have auto sync set. That way the settings that I change here are going to apply to all of those images that are highlighted at the bottom. The first thing I'm going to do is go into the profile browser. And I think I'm going to see what the Astia Soft looks like. And I kind of like that one, so I'm going to stick with Astia Soft and kind of get rid of the Velvia one. It was just a little too saturated for this photo. There's a lot of color going on here. So I'll go ahead and close this. I'm also going to increase the shadow slider just a touch to bring some more light in there, as well as the exposure, but just a little bit, because I don't want to add too much brightness to the white part of that cheese. I'm also going to take the highlight slider and reduce it to the left. Next, I'm going to go down to the HSL panel, and I'm going to see what it looks like if I remove the saturation and luminance adjustments. Now I'm going to go back to where it was before, so I'll just press the Command or Control Z twice, and that will bring them back. So I do kind of like what it's doing. It's just a little too intense. So I'm going to take the green luminance slider and kind of bring it about halfway. So it's at plus 20 there. And I think that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to press G to go back to my grid view. I'll increase the size a little bit so we can see things a little bit more clearly. And now I'd like to sync these settings with the top-down photos below. So I'll click that last image that was edited there, hold my Shift key, and then click the last image in the grid view. Then I'll go to Sync Settings, I'm going to make sure that transform is unchecked and then click synchronize. These photos down here look a little too bright, so I'm going to highlight all 3 of these photos and then press D to go to the Develop module. I still have HSL open, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the saturation and luminance settings for these 3 images. So I just double-clicked the saturation name there, and I'll do the same for luminance, and I think that helped that photo. So now I have all of my Barado photos edited, and I did it really quickly by using the copy and paste settings as well as syncing my photographs using Lightroom. Thanks so much for joining me in this video training. To learn more about me and my work, please visit nicolesy.com.